Legacy is not just wealth, and generational wealth is not just money. Because in lack of generational knowledge, whatever you build does not get passed down. Whatever you build does not transfer over because of the lack of knowledge of how to actually manage what it is that you put in place. Heroes. Martin Luther King did not die the wealthiest man in the world, but he left a legacy and he left knowledge that has been passed down from generations to generations to generations.
Well, you know what, Jason, it's a difficult conversation. It's an uncomfortable conversation. And we're human and we don't like discomfort. And some of this could also be based on family. You know, these are conversations that mom and dad didn't talk about, big mama didn't talk about, right? And so they are uncomfortable. A lot of people don't like to think about their own mortality or to think about the loss of a spouse or a child. And so again, I think it just makes it a conversation that intellectually you may know that you need to have, but practically it's just uncomfortable. And so people avoid it.
Some conversations feel impossible, especially those about death, loss, and major life transitions. But avoiding these talks doesn't protect us, it isolates us. Netti Jones is a licensed psychotherapist, an author, and an advocate with over 25 years of experience helping women heal emotionally and live purposeful lives. She knows that breaking the silence can transition from fear into freedom and self-doubt into strength. Netti's own what-if moment came when she realized her parents hadn't done their estate planning, reminding her how vital it is to ask the questions others might avoid. She gifted her parents their estate planning, and now she shares why these conversations are critical for protecting loved ones. Today, Netti is here to guide us through the emotional realities of these conversations, how to start them, how to manage the feelings that stir up, and to keep them going in a way that honors family and loved ones. Because when the what if happens, you would have wished you would have. I want to welcome our guest, Netti Jones. How are you doing today?
Good morning, Jason. I am doing well, and thank you so much for the opportunity to come to talk about things that I'm so passionate about, you know, emotional wellness and having these difficult conversations. So I'm glad we're here today and I'm ready to get started.
No, absolutely. I thank you for taking the time out. I know that, these conversations and that I've started down this path with, I love having these conversations with different people with different perspectives and different experiences from different backgrounds. And I think all of this is just necessary to create the foundation to educate people on how to start to unpack these type of conversations. So I like to always just dive right in. So, Nettie, from your experience as a therapist, why do you think families and couples find it so hard to talk about death and major transitions?
Yeah. Well, you know what, Jason, it's a difficult conversation. It's an uncomfortable conversation. And we're human and we don't like discomfort. And some of this could also be based on family. You know, these are conversations that mom and dad didn't talk about, big mama didn't talk about, right? And so they are uncomfortable. A lot of people don't like to think about their own mortality or to think about the loss of a spouse or a child. And so again, I think it just makes it a conversation that intellectually you may know that you need to have, but practically it's just uncomfortable. And so people avoid it.
When it comes to you just being just more seasoned in life.
You call me old.
No. You like fine wine, okay? You like seasoned,
I'm just teasing you.
like
Okay, Jay.
I know that just dating back to maybe just when you were younger, just curious on why those conversations just were taboo to have when you were a
Yeah.
kid?
Let me say this. The conversations were, first of all, I grew up in an era where children were seen and not heard. And so a lot of those conversations probably were not had around us as children, right? But what I do remember is family talking about plots. Now, let me tell you, I believe African American people, they do nothing else. They're going to get some plots. They're going to go to the cemetery and they're going to make sure that everybody has a plot. Well, that's great because it says that there is some thought in that and there is some level of planning to a certain extent, but there's so many other things that go before you even get to the plot. And that's the part that I think has been left out significantly. And, I think how people view death, although they know it's imminent, it was just something that was not discussed. And also, the era where your word is your bond. Okay. My grandfather would say that all the time. And so there is something that's very powerful about that, but legally that didn't hold up. Right. And so, although this is what you say you're going to do, you're held to the standard to do it. That's not what happens when we lose our loved ones. If it is not in writing, then, hey, it probably doesn't happen. And it goes through a whole process, the probate process. So, my experience as a child was that of fun and not thinking of loss. Was fortunate that I didn't have a lot of losses as a child. So that wasn't anything that I had to really, really experience.
No, and that's good because I think that also, I think, carried over into the generation that we're in now,
Mhm.
where we make plans for weddings, we make plans for birthdays, we make plans for vacations, and we get upset when those plans don't go the way that we expect them to go. But then when a transition happens and there's chaos, we're even more upset. But how could you be more upset when you never made plans or never had the conversation? So I think what would you say from your experience are some of the common fears or misconceptions you see when people avoid these conversations, or why they avoid these conversations?
Outside of being uncomfortable, a lack of knowledge and not knowing what to do, thinking that they don't have enough money to have it done, thinking that they don't have enough to leave. Because you start talking, people think of wills, but there's so much more to estate planning than just a will. And then, having conversations about should something happen to me, who makes this decision about my medical care, and those kind of things. And so I think how you could possibly start that conversation is, equipping your family to be to live in a space where they can make decisions that are not they honor your decisions, right? And so in other words, this is what mom wants, this is what dad wants. And more importantly, it allows them to move through that transition period and experience whatever emotions that are affiliated with it. And so often people can't even really grieve. It's almost like the grief is postponed because of all this business stuff or the lack of things being in order, and you've got to figure things out. And so, I think what I've learned in this space of working with people, there are multiple reasons why people don't. There's not a cookie cutter way. Family dynamics can be different. People are, have strained relationships, or people just don't talk.
Yeah.
And so I think there are multiple reasons. The beauty of the therapy space is you can get the backstory, right? And then kind of go from there.
So how can someone gauge if the other person is emotionally ready to have the conversation?
That's a difficult assessment. Let me say it this way. I think we can assume based on a person's response or reaction. And generally, people will either not want to talk about it or it's just something that they've not thought about it. As far as if they're emotionally ready, I don't know that people are emotionally ready to talk about those things. I think that
Sure.
there are some people, for instance, my husband has been very clear. My mother-in-law has been very clear on specific things as it relates to when they go to glory. But that's a conversation my mother-in-law had over the years with the kids. So my husband is very comfortable talking about that. It makes the girls uncomfortable,
Yeah.
right? but they're conversations. And so you go back to family history, whether a person is emotionally ready. I think it is, if you're a person who can read somebody, maybe you can ask a person and not make assumptions because that person may be experiencing something that they don't even understand.
Yep.
Right. So I think that that's a challenge, and it's a really big responsibility to put on another person to know if that person's emotionally ready. But what I will say, Jason, if you want to have a conversation, I think what's important is to say, hey, listen, I'd like for us to sit down and talk about a couple of things that may be uncomfortable. Tell them specifically what those things are so that they can mentally prepare for the conversation, right? So that they don't feel caught off guard and they can kind of come with some level of expectation of where that conversation may go.
That's good. So, in starting that conversation, what would you say maybe is three phrases or three words they should use to start and then also use to avoid while trying to have that conversation with someone?
I think, hey, let's talk. Because that kind of preface what you want to do. And the words not to say, it depends on who you're talking to. I think some things are a little bit more palatable than others. And I do believe how we preface things gives people an opportunity to be prepared. So, hey, let's talk. And it may be an uncomfortable conversation, it may not be, but we need to talk about some things, and then kind of go ahead and say what they are. And also, like I said earlier, is just because you're ready to talk about it, it may not be the time for the other person. And I think in order for it to be a productive dialogue and an exchange as a conversation, the other person needs to at least be somewhat prepared to have that conversation too.
I agree.
I don't know. I don't know what words not to say because if we're talking about death, I mean, you can say words like expire, go on. I mean, you can make them as pleasant or palatable as you can. But at the end of the day, you're talking about loss. You're
Sure.
talking about death. If that's what you're talking about, you know what I mean? So I don't know the words to avoid. I don't necessarily know that I have three. Do you have any that come to mind for you?
I think that when it comes to starting the conversation, which is one of the reasons why I chose to rephrase or reposition the word transition to legacy, where it's like, hey, I want to have a conversation about the legacy we're looking to leave. And within leaving that legacy, there are going to be some tough conversations and some tough questions that we need to talk about and answer. Therefore, how we choose to leave the legacy for our family or how I choose to want to leave my legacy, it involves us having a conversation that may feel a little uncomfortable, but as we continue to talk through it, the peace will settle in because there will be an understanding. And as I believe that not always, not always, thank you, Holy Spirit, not always,
Yeah.
there's not always peace and understanding, but there can be peace and preparation. And because we never can control the outcome, but at least the preparation gives us peace to be prepared for whatever happens, and that only happens through the conversation. So if someone, so let's just say the other person is not ready, how does a person have the conversation with themselves, start to have the conversations with themselves first to prepare themselves before having
Yeah.
a conversation with someone else?
Yeah, that's good. That's good. That's good. Well, first of all, I think that number one, start with yourself. Are you prepared? Right. And so before I go and have this conversation with my sister or even my spouse, have I put things in order for myself? Right. And then as we start doing, because it's individual planning. This is individual. It's not like a couple plan, although couples do get together and make plans, but this is an individual planning. And so, people are more inclined to listen when you have your house in order. And so you're coming from a place of, hey, listen, this has been kind of a challenge for me going through the process. And so, I just want to share some of my knowledge with you. And these are the benefits. As I look at how I'm leaving my legacy or the family legacy and what that looks like in the transition to that. So this
Okay.
continues to go on and on. So I think the conversation needs to start first with oneself And then that person works on themselves. And so this is the deal. If I'm waiting on you to make a move about what you're doing and I've not done it, then what are we really doing here? And
Sure.
so I think that having made sure that you're doing those things that you need to do. And as you were saying, I really love that start of the conversation. And it's to include that person in the process of doing that for themselves, and it's kind of like, hey, look, let's do this together. And as it relates to, you sharing that one of the things that I did, I gifted my parents that I assumed they had done that. And so being able to help them and allow them, and they did not want to do it. They
Yeah.
procrastinated. They said they did, but the process of filling out all of the information. And that's another thing too. For a lot of people, this evokes very emotional spaces. And so I think it's so much more to just the paperwork. There are a lot of emotions that go into this.
So, how do you recommend when these talks bring up strong emotions like anger or deep sadness or confusion, frustration, lack of knowledge? How do you recommend a person deals or addresses that when that comes up?
Yeah, emotions are so important, and I am one to tell people to allow themselves to acknowledge, experience, and move through their emotion. The one thing that I cannot do, Jason, is I can't control your emotions. And for people that we love and care about, that's sometimes hard because what we want to do is try to manage that for them, but we can't. And
Sure.
so when you experience that other person having these responses or experiencing these emotions, you know, I say give them the space, allow them to honor that. And, even if it's exaggerated or that's not your experience, but it's been their experience, if they're angry, their anger may be warranted for them. And when we start talking about family dynamics, now we're talking about, hey, listen, we need to get together and do these things, but you've got some unresolved issues.
Yeah.
And so, how do you address the business at hand when you've got the dynamics of people that are not in a good state? So, managing your own emotions and when others are experiencing those emotions, how do you address them? I say you allow them to experience them and say, hey, listen, this is still a very important conversation. When is a good time for us to reconnect on it?
Sure. How would one, what are some tools, I guess, or how does one help navigate the discussion from it turning into a discussion versus turning it into an argument where the other person just shuts down?
Yeah. The word shut down, people process things differently. And sometimes people shut down, or I'm going to use the word shut down, but people are quiet because they're processing, they're thinking, because they're trying to figure out what they're experiencing emotionally. Or sometimes they're not saying anything because if they say something, it might not be nice. And so sometimes silence is not a bad thing. But what it does say is, I don't want to say anything right now. That is clear. And so the shutdown may not mean that they're emotionally shutting down. They're just not a part of the dialogue, or they're not going to continue the conversation. So one of the things I think is really good is to have a third party. And that might be to find a great probate attorney who can explain some things. And so, I think you talked about this transition and leaving a legacy in this whole process. That allows people to think about things or do a different, I think, have a different mindset on the dialogue and the conversation. Going to a probate attorney allows them to explain the process and the purpose of what you're planning, what that looks like, and also whatever the financial responsibilities are. It gives people a clear idea of what you're talking about. And sometimes we may not do a good job of conveying that. And so if you feel that you're getting resistance on this end, hey, listen, let's go and get some information. If you're not able to do that, have them, hey, look up, tell me what you get, look up some information on estate planning or, preparing for loss or for, what I love the what if happens, right? And so again, if that person continues not to be open to that process, then there's not really much you can do other than plan for what you can.
Sure. And I think that just to kind of piggyback on that, I believe that most people, I'm a very big, huge component of therapy.
Mhm.
Even before my wife stayed, I've been in therapy for the last 20 years. I'm very familiar with therapy. And I believe that most people, same thing as transitioning, have this thought about therapy and they don't need it and what it's for, and them not being able to understand and use it as a tool to help them unpack, help them comprehend, and help them express things that they're feeling. And I believe that just from this conversation, it's really highlighting that this, to have an effective plan in place, it just comes in steps. And it's not something like that you have to do all at the beginning. And, I'm going to just tie my business acumen and knowledge into this. So when I started a business in the Bay Area, which was a tech startup, they were they always emphasize the word MVP. And that stands for minimum valuable product. And that is a product that you build with just getting out the concept. It's not going to be perfect. It's not supposed to be perfect, but it's supposed to build a framework around what it is that you're trying to launch to see how the best way to get it work, because there's going to be iterations and there's going to be quirks that you have to work out, bugs that you have to work out, but it takes that minimum valuable product to understand what that is that you are building and where the problems are going to arrive. And I believe that starting off to have this conversation, an MVP, a framework with yourself, helps you create that minimum valuable product that gives you the ability to see what triggers you have, what emotional blocks you have, and things that you can work on before bringing that conversation to somebody else. So therefore, it doesn't turn into an emotional fight versus a comprehensive and knowledge and educational session. I believe, and even in terms of what you were just sharing, if I think also too, another framework that you could probably help with is explaining tools to give somebody to practice the role of listening versus sharing, because most people want to share but they don't have the tools on how to just listen. So could you maybe give us some framework on how to listen and
Yeah,
allow those emotions and feelings to pass through versus listening to share versus listening to understand?
right. Yeah. You know, I believe a lot of times people want to feel heard. And in an effort to want to feel heard, they don't create the space to listen, even see that they probably have been heard. Right. And so listening is, I think, a huge part of great communication. Because if I'm not listening to what you're sharing, then how can I respond in a way, if it's warranted, that is contributing to the dialogue? And so one of the things that I share with individuals is that when we listen to a person, it's not for our understanding, but it's for the understanding of the person who's talking. So I use an example of when we go to a movie or we're watching a movie, things are happening and you're following that person. So you understand the emotions, the feelings, the decisions based on you just following the person. And it's that way if you're listening to a person for their understanding, what they're sharing, then you understand, okay, so that's why she felt that way because she saw this. Now, what you said and what she saw are two different things, but this is what she's saying she felt because of what she saw. Now that you understand that, you go, okay, well, that makes sense. It allows you to appreciate the other person. So listening for someone else's understanding, number one, allows you to appreciate the person. And then also, it allows you to create the space so that person can now listen to you. Now, Jason, there are just going to be some people who don't want to listen. They're the dumpers. They dump and leave. You create the space, they come, they dump, and you go. And at the end of the day, you so drained for listening, you don't even want to share. I
Yeah.
mean, there are just some personalities where people are always talking and they have not mastered listening. But listening is so important. My dad would say if somebody's talking too much or something about what they're saying is probably not true.
Yeah.
So people who are observers and listeners learn so much.
Sure. I don't remember who said this quote, but it was something that I heard years back. And me and my wife, like most people, we were hitting our 7-year stretch. It was getting funky in the household, And we were in therapy. And I don't remember what said it or where we got it from, but I sat her down and I said, I think the framework we should put in place is when one person is talking, we have to talk, we have to listen and talk to each other with the intent to connect. Because if I'm talking to you and I'm not trying to build a connection with you, then I'm just talking to just dump on you. And I believe that if you're talking and I'm listening to connect, I'm going to not process what you're saying through a filter of me trying to listen to respond. And
Absolutely.
I think in these situations, when a person is talking and they're bringing up this conversation, if you are listening to connect with them, so therefore you are able to clearly filter what they're saying through their fears, their insecurities, their lack of knowledge, it's going to give you a response that's going to then connect with what it is that they're actually saying versus you saying, no, well, yeah, no, I hear all that, but
Hmm.
listen, this is important. That's not connecting. That once again is just
Right.
the dumping.
Yeah. And you have to be in the space where you want to connect. And
Sure.
a lot of conversations, Jason, people are trying to persuade the other person to see it from their perspective. And when the perspectives are different, and then you get into, I call the cycle, that little cycle. So you're saying the same thing over and over. And what you're really trying to do is persuade this person to agree with what you're saying. And that may not always be the case.
Sure.
So, when we start having these conversations, the real question is you need to understand for yourself the purpose of your conversation with the other person. Are you trying to impart information? In other words, you're going to say, hey, listen, just want to share this with you. You're not expecting a dialogue. You're not expecting them to give you any information. You just kind of put this on their lap. The other part is you want to have a conversation, which means you want exchange of information. So I want to ask you some questions and I want some responses, right? So I want this back and forth dialogue, and that's what's important when we're having these conversations. I love the whole part about listen, when I'm listening to you, I'm listening for the connect. The other part is both parties have to be in the space to want that connection. But I believe that that's what going to therapy allows you to come up with these agreements. So when you arrive at the space where the perspectives are polar opposite, the one thing that comes to mind is, you know what? Okay, let's center ourselves and let me find a way to try to connect to what he's saying,
Yeah.
but it's the awareness. Anytime we're aware of things, we can make adjustments.
Yeah. And I also think, which when we had a conversation offline, and there was something that was powerful that you said, which I believe that it also ties into when we are having these conversations, we are having these conversations as if this is the one and only time we're going to ever have this conversation. And these conversations are not one-time conversations. These conversations, or they're not one-time events. Like this is one big, we're in our head, we're making this into one big event where
Hmm.
we're going to have this conversation and this is the event, and everything has to be figured out, and everything we have to know A, B, C, and D, opposed to understanding that this is a conversation is a ever evolving conversation. Because what you said to me offline was the conversation that you would have with yourself at the age that you're at now is not the same conversation that you would have with yourself at the age when you started having this conversation. So that conversation is different, but that conversation evolves into where you're at now. So I think that is another way when approaching this conversation is to don't approach it as a one-time event. Approach it as multiple events, sequels, prequels, and
Yeah.
follow-ups.
Yes. Yes. And life events create space for dialogue, health issues. So, say, for instance, for whatever reason, you go to the hospital, and then you're like, what, medical directives. And thought about that, right? So now it's an opportunity. Okay, so now medical directives. What else do we need to do? Insurance policies now are they're financial tools. The awareness of that, and having these conversations. Also, when you start looking at wealth building and legacy, and you start looking at those things. And so for some people who are business minded, and that's the intention. And so when you use the word legacy, Jason, for a lot of people, they may think legacy means I have wealth to live. And it, I'm not saying it turns them off, but indirectly for some people, that means that's not me,
Sure.
and that's why your platform is amazing.
Thank
It's
you.
because the more we have these conversations, the more people become aware. As an advocate for emotional and psychological wellness for women, I am always talking about that. It's like the kitchen conversation everywhere I go. I mean, I don't solicit it. People we just kind of naturally talk about it. And it's more like, we have to take care of ourselves. I'm not having a speech. But what I'm saying is that it's a very organic conversation that I think unfolds in spaces and places. And it just starts with the people that are close to us.
Yeah. And so I had a conversation at the podcast summit with a wealth management financial advisor, which we actually shot an episode while we were down there. And we had this and we talked about, and even when I talk to wealth management people or financial advisors, I always communicate to them, and I want to communicate this to people that are watching too, that it does start with education, because most people don't understand that legacy is not just wealth, and generational wealth is not just money. Because in lack of generational knowledge, whatever you build does not get passed down. Whatever you build does not transfer over because of the lack of knowledge of how to actually manage what it is that you put in place. And when I think about some of my heroes, Martin Luther King did not die the wealthiest man in the world, but he left a legacy, and he left knowledge that has been passed down from generations to generations to generations. Jesus did not die on the earth financially a wealthy man, but he did leave us with generational knowledge to allow us to be rich spiritually, and to be able to take the information that he had provided us to be able to build upon and continue to create and manage certain situations. Same thing with Martin Luther King. Like, you can Harriet Tubman. There's all of these people who
Absolutely.
had generational knowledge to pass down that gave their families and even us here today the ability to create generational wealth. So I always like to make sure that people understand that legacy isn't just about money. Legacy is about conversations. Generational wealth is not about the money. Generational wealth is about generational knowledge.
Yeah,
So
absolutely. Absolutely. Well said. I love it.
thank you. Thank you. So if someone regrets not talking sooner, what would you like? What would you say to the person who, or I guess not what would you say, more than how would you advise, or what are tools that somebody can put in place maybe after they've seen a transition but did not make the proper preparation? So now they're dealing with this from an emotional standpoint. I was literally just last night, one of my friends was out of town, and one of his good friends was house sitting for him. And he was like, hey, you guys should connect. You guys could talk about golf and whatnot. So we connected last time, we started talking, and brought up the podcast and what it is that I do. And he was like, it's crazy or interesting that you just brought this up. Since 20 February of this year, 10 people in his immediate family passed away. 10 people.
That's a lot.
And he was like, when my grandmother passed away, within 24 hours, my great aunt passed away. But there were cousins and passed away, and he was just feeling so heavy because of the conversations that didn't get had, but the burden that was placed on his mom to have to manage all of this. And, you know, I'm obviously not a therapist. I'm not qualified to even help him navigate those emotions. But I didn't know, like, he's now I could see it in his eyes. He was carrying this like emotions of like, I know that this is something that needs to be put in place now, but I don't think he's dealt with those emotions of his family not preparing.
Yeah. So you got the emotions of loss. And I would imagine, I mean, 10, that's a lot. One is a lot. And I don't care how much you think you can prepare emotionally to lose a loved one, you cannot. We believe, okay, well, that person was ill. And so, you prepare. No, loss is loss. Um, as it relates to, unfortunately, his mom being in the position where she's having to make these decisions because for whatever reason, other people did not make the decision. I don't know that there was a responsibility that that mom had on making sure that these loved ones took care of their business. But it definitely sounds like the burden was on her. And regret, share with people that, I've chosen only because I have a lot of therapy too. I've chosen not to live a life with regret because it doesn't serve me. Right. And so I believe that even in the decisions that were not the wisest decisions, those are the decisions I made at that time based on what was before me, where I was, and I made the decision. So fast forward, I'm here. And so for me to be regretful of not doing what I should have or didn't do it the way I should have doesn't serve me. So then the other part is, but what can you do now? Right? What can you do now to do for yourself and then maybe share for others, But I think that there's so many opportunities, Jason, for what if I had. And we can plan as best we can, but there is going to be something that maybe we didn't consider. There may be something we just didn't know about, or we knew about it but felt like we had time. And so, as good as this dialogue, as good as this conversation is, and we have this, and I go, okay, I'm going to get my affairs in order. I walk out the door and things change.
Sure.
Yeah. So, again, I go back to allowing people to experience and feel what they're feeling, you know, and to say, I wish I had told my mom or told my cousin this is something that they should have done. I wish that my mom would have had these conversations. Okay, but now that you've experienced this, what do you do? Because that is all we can do. We
Sure.
cannot change anything. This podcast started about 40 minutes ago. That time is over. We cannot redeem that again. We can't go back and capture it again. We could edit.
Yeah.
But you know what I'm saying. That is behind us. We can't change anything about that. But what we can do is, what do I do now and move forward? So, to answer your question about people who have those regrets, talk about them and ask them, so I understand that maybe you felt like you could have done more, you didn't do enough, we could have done something different. So now, what do you do now? So, I think it's important to acknowledge that, but to empower them to say, hey, listen, because it's never too late to make decisions about moving forward.
Yeah. No, that's good.
That's
And I
good. And
think
I think
for the sake of the conversation and people listening, I don't want to bombard them with too much. I would like to give them, you know, bite-sized, actionable steps and education and things that they can actually take, apply, and process now. But I did want to move into talking more about you and what it is that you're doing, how you're working with people, and how you're working with women, and just give the people that are watching just a little bit more information about that.
Yeah. Oh, thank you. Yeah. So, started out years ago, been in this mental health profession for about 30 years. And it started out with families, and who primarily would come would be moms and kids. So for some reason, I became the kid whisperer. But what I recognize is that for children to be in healthy and well spaces emotionally, that it required the moms or the parents to do something. And which led me to this natural transition to I would ask the moms, hey, when are you gonna come sit on my couch? And so then I just had a passion with working with women. So fast forward, that is 95% of what I do. I work with women for emotional psychological wellness. And one of the things that's most important for me is to help them develop healthy relationships. But that healthy relationship starts with that woman and the relationship she has with herself. So I start off each session with what are you grateful for? And then what does your soul say? I think that gratitude allows us to be in a space where we recognize that there is something that is good, something that is we could be grateful for. And then the second question is, what does your soul say allows that person, that woman, to get in touch with her inner self, you know, because she knows all of the answers to everything. And so what's important for me is that emotional and psychological wellness and having the most important relationship, and that's the relationship with yourself. Which, if I am in a good relationship with myself, all my relationships will be effective.
That's good. Yeah, I think that's good. And I think that it is it's a great conversation for women to start having with themselves
And then,
and men, which you can actually, I'll have a link down here. We have the man you must become, and we talked about that,
yeah,
about the man you must become and having those conversations with yourself to be able and having that dialogue with yourself, because yourself and having that conversation with yourself is going to be the most important person you have the conversation with
absolutely.
before you decide to choose to have conversations with anyone else. So I think that that is powerful and that is great. So awesome. Well, Nettie, I want to thank you for sharing your warmth, your wisdom, your practical guidance on this topic that so many avoid. And to everyone listening, taking the time to talk about what comes next is an act of courage and it's an act of love. It's protection, it's connection, it's preparedness, and it's preparing us for life's hardest moments. And if you are looking for tools to start this conversation, I once again encourage you to visit thelegacydeck.com. There's a link down below to give you tools to help. I encourage you also to reach out to therapists to start having the conversations with yourself before you start having the conversations with anyone else. Where can people find you? And then where can they learn more about what it is that you're doing if they're looking to also get connected with you?
Yeah. So my website is nettijones.com. Social media platforms, Nettie Jones, I think it's Instagram, Nettie Jones TGT, Facebook, LinkedIn, Nettie Jones.
Awesome.
Yeah. And thank you so much, Jason, for an opportunity to sit and chat. I've learned so much. And yes, for sure, this card deck is the truth. I love it. And I think that you're asking, how to start the conversation. Get Jason's card deck.
Yeah, awesome. Well, thank you for that. And yes, for everybody watching, once again, I am your host, Jason Brown. This is the When What If Happens podcast. I hope you guys were able to take down some notes, rewatch this, share it with somebody who you love, share it with somebody who is going through a storm, and also just share it so we can start to make these conversations a lot more normal and a lot more lighthearted. Until next time, I will see you again on the When What If Happens podcast. Thank you guys.